It took 11 years. 11 years of blood, siege, and humiliation. To put this into perspective, the legendary Siege of Constantinople, which ended the Roman Empire, lasted less than 2 months. Yet for Oda Nobunaga, the great unifier of Japan, his ambition was brought to a grinding halt by a single fortress, Ishiyama Hongan-ji. This was not a castle held by a rival warlord, not a fortress defended by the samurai elite. It was a cathedral, a fortress cathedral defended by an army of the faithful, thousands of radical monks, peasants, and commoners united not by a daimyo, but by a powerful, unshakable belief. They wielded few legendary blades, yet they broke Nobunaga's finest armies. They held no traditional provinces, yet they controlled a supply line he could not sever. How did this popular army defy the most ruthless strategist of the Sengoku period for over a decade? This was not a mere rebellion. It was Japan's last and greatest holy war. The story you think you know is wrong. Watch this until the end to discover the hidden truth of the Ikkō-ikki and the terrifying ideology that almost shattered the samurai class forever. The year is 1571. The marshy delta of Nagashima is a crucible of mud, water, and faith. From his command post, Oda Nobunaga watches as his elite samurai vanguard, a river of steel and lacquer, pushes into the network of wooden forts and palisades. Their contempt for the enemy is palpable. Inside are the Ikkō-ikki, the single-minded league. To the samurai, they are little more than a peasant mob, an undisciplined swarm animated by the nonsensical sermons of their Jodo Shinshu priests. Nobunaga's generals see a simple task ahead: crush the rebellion, burn the temples, and restore order. They believe superior training, superior armor, and the code of Bushido make victory an inevitability. This was their fatal mistake. They expected fear. They were met with a wall of sound, a thunderous chant of the Nembutsu, a prayer that was also a war cry. As the samurai breached the outer defenses, the trap was sprung. Suddenly, from behind hidden walls and earthen berms, thousands of arquebuses, matchlock firearms, erupted in a single, deafening volley. The disciplined samurai ranks dissolved into chaos. This was not the honorable spear-to-sword combat they knew. This was industrial-scale slaughter. Before they could recover, the gates flew open and the swarm emerged. They were not a mob. They were a tide of humanity, armed with spears, farming implements, and a fanatical devotion that nullified the samurai's individual prowess. Nobunaga's own brother, Oda Nobunaga, was slain in the onslaught. The professional warriors, the masters of Beijing and Japan, were routed by an army of believers. How could this happen? How could an army of commoners so utterly humiliate the man who would be master of the nation? To understand the nature of this defeat, we must look beyond the battlefield. We must deconstruct the intricate web of faith, economics, and intelligence that form the true fortress of the Ikkō-ikki. To understand the Ikkō-ikki's power, we must discard the analogy of a traditional samurai army. This was not a pyramid with a daimyo at the peak. A better analogy is a subterranean root system, a massive fungal network hidden just beneath the surface of Japanese society. It was resilient, decentralized, and capable of fruiting, exploding into rebellion, anywhere and everywhere, all at once. Nobunaga was not fighting a single general. He was fighting an idea, and that idea had built its own nation-state. The root of this power was a radical theological promise. The Jodo Shinshu, or True Pure Land school of Buddhism, taught a revolutionary concept. Salvation was not for the elite, not earned through years of complex ritual or monastic study. It was immediate, and it was for everyone. By simply chanting the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu, with sincere faith, any soul, be it a peasant, a merchant, or a disillusioned warrior, could be reborn in the Pure Land. This ideology was a spiritual firebreak against the rigid, oppressive feudalism of the samurai class. It told the commoner that their soul was as worthy as their lord's. From this single powerful idea, a sophisticated structure emerged. The first layer was economic. The Ikkō-ikki established Jinaiko, autonomous temple towns, that were self-governing and tax-exempt. These were not just places of worship, they were bustling centers of commerce, attracting merchants and artisans who were free from the arbitrary taxes of local warlords. This network generated immense independent wealth. The second layer was geopolitical. The very heart of their power, the fortress cathedral of Ishiyama Hongan-ji, was a strategic masterpiece. It was built on a heavily fortified delta at the mouth of the Yodo River, giving it direct control over all sea and river trade into the capital, Kyoto. It was a fortress, a port, and a holy see, all in one. This combination created a strategic nightmare for Oda Nobunaga. When we analyze his dilemma, we see he was trapped in a multi-front war unlike any other. He could not decisively defeat the Ikkō-ikki in one place. If he marched his armies to attack the Ikki in their northern stronghold of Ekkō, the fortress of Nagashima to his east would rise up, threatening his supply lines. If he turned to burn Nagashima, the central fortress of Ishiyama Hongan-ji would coordinate with his samurai enemies, like the powerful Mori clan, who saw the Ikki as a perfect proxy force. The Mori, masters of the sea, continuously resupplied the Hongan-ji by ship, nullifying Nobunaga's sieges. The Ikkō-ikki, in effect, had created an anti-state. It possessed a unifying ideology more potent than clan loyalty, a self-sustaining economy that funded its wars, a vast intelligence network of priests and believers, and a central fortress that was for a decade simply impregnable. They bought firearms by the thousand, often cornering the market before Nobunaga could. Their peasant armies were frequently better armed with modern arquebuses than the samurai sent to kill them. This was the web that held Nobunaga fast. He wasn't just fighting an enemy, he was fighting a parallel society. And to defeat it, he would have to become a monster. The year is 1574. Oda Nobunaga has learned from his humiliation. The man who returns to the delta of Nagashima is not the same commander. The contempt for his enemy has burned away, replaced by a cold, methodical resolve. The Ikkō-ikki had called him the Dairokuten Mao, the demon king of the sixth heaven. He would now show them what that meant. On the other side, the Nagashima defenders, having tasted victory, are sealed in by their own faith, arrogant in their divine protection and their impenetrable terrain. They have no idea that Nobunaga is no longer playing their game. His solution is one of total, systematic annihilation. He brings an army not just of warriors, but of laborers. He builds a vast ring of palisades, watchtowers, and fortresses, miles in circumference, completely enclosing the entire Nagashima Delta complex. This is not a wall of siege, it is a cage. He seals every river, every path, every waterway. And then, he waits. Throughout the suffocating summer heat, his army simply encircles the Ikki, cutting off all food, all supplies. The thousands of believers inside, men, women, and children, are left to starve. After months of this agonizing silent pressure, Nobunaga gives the final order. The assault, when it comes, is not a glorious samurai charge. On a dry, windy day, his troops advance with torches. They set fire to the vast wooden complex from every side, simultaneously. The palisades they had built now serve their true purpose, to prevent any escape. The wind whips the dry reeds and wooden forts into a singular, roaring inferno. The thunderous chant of the Nembutsu is consumed by the screams of 20,000 people burning alive. Nobunaga watches, impassive, as the fortress of faith is reduced to a smoking, blackened grave. This unimaginable brutality, however, did not end the war. One fortress remained, the heart of the Ikkō power, Ishiyama Hongan-ji. It still mocked him, its priests still defiant, its walls still supplied by the sea. Nobunaga's land armies were useless as long as the Mori clan's navy, the most powerful in Japan, could break his blockade at will. This problem could not be solved by fire or palisades. It required a leap of imagination. Nobunaga, the great innovator, conceived of a new weapon, something unseen in Japanese warfare. He ordered the construction of 6 massive, unprecedented vessels. They were called tekosen, iron ships. In 1578, at the decisive Second Battle of Kizugawa-guchi, the Mori fleet of 600 ships sailed to resupply the Hongan-ji. They were met by Nobunaga's 6 bizarre black leviathans. The Mori commander, confident in his numbers, ordered the traditional attack: swarm the enemy and shower them with fire arrows. It was a fatal miscalculation. The fire arrows bounced harmlessly off the iron-plated hulls. As the smaller Mori vessels closed in, the tekosen revealed their true, terrifying purpose. They were not ships, they were floating fortresses, bristling with cannon and heavy-caliber arquebuses. A single, coordinated volley erupted from the iron ships, a storm of lead and fire that smashed the wooden Mori fleet to splinters. It was a massacre. The Mori navy was broken, and it never returned. The Ikkō-ikki's lifeline to the sea was severed forever. The Demon King's solution was complete: a campaign of calculated terror to break their bodies, and a technological revolution to break their unshakable fortress. The most persistent myth surrounding this conflict is that it was a simple peasant revolt. This is a profound misunderstanding of the facts. The sources tell us a very different story. The Ikkō-ikki were not a disorganized rabble of farmers with sharpened bamboo. They were, in many regions, one of the most technologically advanced, wealthiest, and best organized forces in Japan. When we analyze the records, we find that their control of major trade hubs and their autonomous Jinaiko towns gave them a treasury that rivaled many daimyo. They used this wealth to become a primary customer in the nascent global arms trade, purchasing thousands of arquebuses from Portuguese traders. In many of the early encounters, it was Nobunaga's samurai who were outgunned by the Ikki's superior firepower. This was not a revolt. It was a war between 2 parallel states, one feudal and one theological. This brings us to the psychology of Oda Nobunaga. His actions at Nagashima, the caging and mass burning of 20,000 people, are often dismissed as the act of a savage, a demon king, lost to rage. But this too is a simplistic reading. It was not a fit of passion, it was a cold, calculated act of psychological warfare. Nobunaga understood, in a way his contemporaries did not, that he was not just fighting men. He was fighting an idea, the idea that faith in Amida Buddha offered a salvation that was superior to the authority of the samurai. Swords and spears cannot kill an idea. Sieges cannot starve a belief. Nobunaga's solution was, therefore, terrifyingly logical. If the Ikki's strength was their unshakable faith in paradise, he would have to shatter that faith by creating a hell on earth so absolute, so inescapable, that their god would be proven powerless to save them. The inferno at Nagashima was not just an execution. It was a theological statement. It was a message sent to every believer in the Hongan-ji. Your chants are useless. Your God will not answer. I am the only power in this world. Ultimately, 2 decisive factors led to Nobunaga's victory. First, his willingness to abandon the traditional rules of samurai warfare. He embraced a strategy of total war, targeting not just the Ikki's armies, but their entire social and economic ecosystem, including the civilians who supported it. Second, and most decisively, was technological innovation. The Ikkō-ikki's fortress was impregnable by land, their faith was unshakable. But their survival depended on a physical supply line. The Tekosen, the ironclad ships, were the silver bullet. They represented a victory of engineering over ideology. Nobunaga couldn't break the defenders' faith, so he broke their supply chain. The war was won, not by the sword, but by logistics and iron. Was this a necessary, brutal step to unify a war-torn nation? Or was Nobunaga's cruelty a pathological flaw, a sign of a man who would inevitably be betrayed by those he terrorized? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The fall of Ishiyama Hongan-ji in 1580 was more than the end of a siege. It was the end of an epoch. This 11-year war was the last and greatest of Japan's religious conflicts. Nobunaga's victory drew a permanent, brutal line in the sand. Never again would a religious institution be allowed to wield temporal, military power to rival the samurai state. By crushing the Ikkō-ikki, Nobunaga had not just defeated an enemy, he had fundamentally re-engineered Japanese society, establishing the absolute supremacy of the warrior class that would define the nation for the next 300 years. The age of holy war was over, and the age of absolute military unification had begun. The fates of the leaders in this conflict are a stark study in irony. Kosa, the 11th abbot of the Jodo Shinshu, the man who had held the Demon King at bay for a decade, was ultimately spared. After a direct intervention by the emperor, he was allowed to surrender and go into exile. His organization was shattered, but his bloodline continued. Oda Nobunaga, the victor, the unassailable unifier, would not be so fortunate. Just 2 years after his final triumph over the Ikki, he was betrayed at Hongan-ji, not by a fanatic or a peasant, but by his own general, Akechi Mitsuhide. His reign of calculated terror had unified his enemies, but it had also sown the seeds of mistrust in his own inner circle. He died surrounded by flames, a fate he had so often inflicted on his foes. And for a final, little-known piece of history, what became of the ground zero of this epic conflict, the mighty fortress cathedral of Ishiyama Hongan-ji? After its surrender, the entire complex was razed to the ground. But the site, a strategic chokehold of immense value, would not remain empty. Nobunaga's successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, chose that very same spot to build his own monument to ultimate power. Today, it is the site of Osaka Castle, one of the most famous symbols of samurai authority in all of Japan. The foundation of the great unifier's ultimate castle rests, quite literally, on the ashes of the Holy Army that almost destroyed them. History is never truly erased. The land remembers. The ideas of faith, freedom, and power that clashed on these fields continue to echo, whispering in the foundations of the modern world, long after the swords have rusted and the chants have faded to silence.